Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right in today because we're going to radically change how you look at your entire digital world. I mean, think about it. Every email you send, every movie you stream, every time you tap to pay, it feels like magic, right? Like it's just beaming through the air. But today, we're stripping away that illusion. We're looking at the actual physical reality of our global network. And honestly, it's a reality that's vast, surprisingly fragile, and right now, it's at the center of some intense international scrutiny.
Okay, let's dive into this. Where does the internet actually live? When you hear the cloud, you probably picture, your data floating ethereally up in the sky, bouncing between cell towers and satellites overhead. It's a nice, comforting thought, this completely wireless utopia. But what if I told you that wireless world is mostly a myth? Actually, scratch that. It's almost entirely a myth. The true home of the internet isn't in the sky at all. It is submerged in the darkest, most inaccessible places on our planet.
To really understand the stakes here, let's look at this highly specific maritime incident. Picture this. It's the morning of February 25, 2025. Taiwanese Coast Guard officers board a cargo ship drifting just off Penghu Island. Now, the ship has a Chinese crew, the cargo manifest looks totally normal, no obvious red flags. But investigators believe that right beneath the hull, hidden underwater, someone had made a deliberate attempt to sever one of the undersea cables connecting Penghu to the rest of Taiwan's network. So the ship is detained, the cable was damaged, and literally in an instant, for a few incredibly tense hours, a small island's entire link to the outside digital world was put at massive risk. Just like that. And that incident completely shatters this wireless illusion we all have. We have to trade the myth of the cloud for the physical reality of the ocean floor. Most people never think about this infrastructure because, well, it's invisible to us. But right now, somewhere beneath the crushing weight of the ocean, there's a physical cable about the width of a standard garden hose, carrying your video calls and your bank transfers at the speed of light. And it's doing it through a bundle of glass fibers that are literally thinner than a human hair. That right there is the physical manifestation of the internet.
And the sheer scale of this invisible system is absolutely staggering. Right now, there are more than 500 of these garden hose-sized cables crossing the world's oceans. If you were to string them all together, end to end, they'd stretch well over 1 million kilometers combined. It's like a giant, intricate puzzle crisscrossing the seabed, physically tying the continents together.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the data from the Federal Communications Commission. Look at that tiny 0.5% sliver for satellite data. Seriously, despite all the massive hype around satellite internet and space tech, less than 0.5% of America's international traffic travels through space. The overwhelming majority, 99.5% of everything connecting the United States to the rest of the online world, runs squarely through those cables lying down there on the seafloor.
Section 1. A Cold War Legacy, from telegraphs to taps.
Now you might be wondering, is this a new problem? Not at all. This isn't just new tech dressed up as old. The first transatlantic cable was actually laid way back in the 1860s. It was basically just a tarred rope of copper wire strung between continents for telegraph signals, and incredibly, some of those lasted 60 or 70 years underwater. Then by the 1950s, telephone cables took over, and starting in the 1980s, fiber optics became the gold standard. But here is the thing. Despite all those massive technological leaps from copper to light, the core vulnerability hasn't changed one bit. It's still just a thin line, sitting all alone on the ocean floor, carrying of almost everything that matters.
And trust me, governments have known about this vulnerability for a very long time. During the Cold War, the US understood it well enough to actively exploit it. There was this highly classified mission, Operation Ivy Bells, where American submarines actually managed to locate and secretly tap Soviet undersea cables. They were just sitting there, listening in on communications the Soviets assumed were perfectly secure at the bottom of the sea. So the crucial point we need to take away here is this. If a cable can be located and tapped, it can absolutely be cut. The whole question of who might cut America's cables has moved from being a quirky Cold War historical footnote into a blazing front and center policy debate.
Section 2. Escalation. Accidents versus attacks.
So, let's look at the modern era, where threats against these vital lifelines have really escalated. But here's the tricky part. Figuring out why a cable went down is incredibly difficult. Most cable damage globally, we're talking roughly 200 incidents every single year, doesn't actually come from international spies or saboteurs. It usually comes from ordinary commercial ships just accidentally dropping their anchors in the wrong place. The US even passed the Don Young Coast Guard Authorization Act in 2022 to try and stop vessels from anchoring too close without permission. But when a cable goes dark, distinguishing a clumsy, accidental anchor drop from a highly deliberate attack by an adversary, in the heat of the moment,
That is nearly impossible.
And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. Those accidental anchor drops provide perfect cover, making actual attacks incredibly hard to spot. But a pattern is emerging that's getting impossible to ignore. In late 2024, cables in the Baltic Sea were cut twice in just about a year. Those were widely treated as suspected sabotage. It even prompted Estonia to up its naval patrols and NATO to step in. Then, in September 2025, an astonishing 15 cables were severed all at once in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea. 15! That is such a critical choke point that the damage literally slowed internet traffic across the Middle East and South Asia for weeks. Now, none of these struck American shores directly, but they definitely served as a massive wake-up call for Washington.
Section 3. The Reckoning, Scrambling to Secure the Seabed.
All of this culminated in November 2025 during a House Homeland Security Subcommittee hearing. And let me tell you, it was an incredibly uncomfortable, blunt public admission. Lawmakers and outside experts went on the record to state that the United States entirely lacks the coordination, the defenses, and the deterrence needed to prevent or even properly respond to a deliberate attack on this infrastructure. Think about that. The nation running more of the global internet's backbone traffic than almost anywhere else on Earth just flat out told the world, we aren't ready. As one witness put it during the testimony, securing a single cable means absolutely nothing if the country hasn't built the sense of urgency to secure all of them.
What followed that hearing was an absolute scramble across the government to close this security gap. The House rapidly passed the Undersea Cable Control Act to restrict foreign adversaries from getting their hands on building and maintenance equipment. Meanwhile, the Senate proposed the Strategic Subsea Cables Act to heavily sanction anyone caught damaging a cable. And the FCC? They completely overhauled their licensing process by mid-2026. Now, on paper, the U.S. has had a framework since the 1921 Cable Landing License Act, which got updated in 2020 by an executive order that empowered a group informally known as Team Telecom to screen for national security risks. But this new FCC overhaul takes things way further. It fast-tracks trusted American operators while permanently excluding companies tied to formal foreign adversaries.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this realization is finally pushing defenses out of just policy and into physical technology. Engineers are basically racing to catch up right now. The first big step being proposed is retrofitting existing cables with sonar sensors. The whole idea is to detect the sound of an approaching ship or a dragging anchor, just to buy the Coast Guard or the Navy a few precious minutes to respond before the line gets cut. The second step they're looking at is establishing designated protection zones, so highly restricted, no-go areas around the absolutely critical cables.
But, here is the staggering limitation to those technological fixes. 750,000 miles. That's how much cable the United States has connected to its interests worldwide. 750,000 miles. Now, designated protection zones have worked out pretty well for smaller nations like Australia and New Zealand, but for a country with America's sheer volume of cables, it simply might not scale. Sure, sonar sensors might buy a few minutes, but to put that into perspective, the U.S. has nowhere near enough ships, crewed or uncrewed, to keep an eye on 750,000 miles of vulnerable infrastructure. It's just too big.
So, what does this all mean? The ultimate takeaway for this explainer is this. The internet you use every single day does not live in the cloud. It lives, quite literally, on the ocean floor, running inside a handful of incredibly fragile lines through some of the most contested waters on Earth. Protecting it is going to take vastly more than one new law, a fancy sonar sensor, or a ship standing watch. It requires all of us learning to finally see an invisible system before an adversary forces us to see it by taking it entirely away. So I'll leave you with this. How secure is the ground your digital life is built on? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you something vital to think about.